Marinette Hits Her Head, a Miraculous Ladybug fanfiction, written and narrated by Christina Chang. Chapter 15, Consequences. It hurts so bad, Marinette moaned pitifully from where she lay, propped up against some cushions, her arms stretched dramatically over her forehead as she tried to shield herself from the drowning ache. Well, no wonder, girl. You were wearing a unified Miraculous for weeks. You're lucky you can move at all. Alia paced the floor of Marinette's room with a restless energy that was starting to add to Marinette's already nauseous headache. She appreciated her friend coming to check up on her, but although it was nice to have someone to share things with, Alia's curiosity was exhausting, and after relaying the entire story twice, Marinette could hardly think above the pulsing throb that echoed between her ears. Well, what was I supposed to do? Cat Noir would have been a goner if I didn't use it, and we needed the extra time, so becoming Lady Aspis seemed like the best thing to do. Alia stopped short as a strange gleam appeared in her eye. Aspis? No way. You named yourself after Adrien? Marinette gasped in shock, her weariness suddenly forgotten as she bolted half upright in protest. What? No, it's Latin for viper or something. No, wait, Greek. Alia stared at her skeptically. Since when do you know Greek? Marinette shrugged her shoulders. Oh, Cat Noir told me. Alia rolled her eyes with a smile. Of course he would know that. And so did Adrien, apparently, because that's basically what he named himself when you gave him the snake Miraculous. Wait, I gave Adrien a Miraculous? Duh. I'm kind of surprised you didn't do it sooner. Except for the fact that it totally distracted you, and apparently he wasn't the person for the job. Of course, I didn't know about any of that, though, until after I found out you were the guardian. Not the person for the job? Marinette repeated slowly. Yeah, which is why you picked someone else, though I don't know who that is. Marinette acknowledged quietly, though her mind was somewhere else. Alia stayed to chat a while longer, then had to rush off to school, leaving Marinette alone with the Kwamis once again. Tikki? Marinette called, and was soon met with a pair of caring violet eyes. What is it, Marinette? When did I give Cat Noir the snake Miraculous? For once, the Kwami looked flustered as her eyes darted about uncertainly. Oh, well, that was on Heroes' Day, wasn't it, Tikki? Wei supplied evenly, while Sass added, You and Cat Noir had to face multiple opponents, each powered by a different Miraculous. But with Cat Noir's use of the snake Miraculous, you were able to predict their movements and defeat them almost simultaneously. But then, why would he say he wasn't the right person? Clearly he was very good at it. Sass smiled kindly. He was an excellent holder, yes, but he's also the holder of the Cat Miraculous, and unless he continuously unified the two, he would struggle to fulfill both roles at once, whereas the new holder you picked is equally capable and clever, and allows Cat Noir to focus on his role as your partner. I guess that makes sense. Marinette conceded doubtfully. You've been through a lot today, Marinette. You should get some rest. Tikki added coaxingly, sliding the covers up to Marinette's chin. Marinette yawned and snuggled deeper into the blankets. You're right. Thanks, Tikki. She shuddered, then peeked open one eye as she added, Can you guys do me a favor? Never mention Lady Aspis again. Adrien fiddled with the beads between his fingers as he tried to focus on what the teacher was saying, but his eyes kept drooping and his head felt like it weighed 1,000,000 pounds. Late nights and little sleep was nothing new, since between random Akuma attacks and early morning photo shoots, he was accustomed to faking his way through fatigue and finding a way to muscle through it. But between the vicious battle with the drones and his spontaneous visit with Marinette, he hadn't caught a wink of sleep and was now paying the price for it. Marinette. He sighed as his heart squeezed and lifted at the same time. It had felt so good to talk with her and spend time together out on her balcony, almost as if things were back to normal. But here at school it was harder to ignore the extent of her injury and the gaping hole it left in his small world. He felt a new sense of compassion for the kid who had lost his gaming progress and the devastating impact a lack of memory could leave. He twisted the string around his hand a few times in frustration beneath the shelter of his desk, then unwound it and rolled the smooth beads between his fingers. Marinette was gone, but that didn't mean she would never come back. Right? His breathing quickened as he heard his father's cold voice echo in his head. She's not gone, Adrien. She will come back. I'll make sure of it. She has to get better. Adrien could see her so clearly. The kind, mysterious smile that still clung to her lips as his mother's once twinkling green eyes lay still and closed against the harsh white pillowcase. The once comforting hands so full of warmth and life now clasped primly against her waist as the doctors shook their heads and exited the room, leaving only their sharp chemical scents behind. A loss so strong and deep threatened to swallow Adrien as the floor seemed to cave in and he struggled to stand, yet he had to see. He had to reach her. He had to have one last chance to say goodbye to the one he loved so well. Adrien leaned sorrowfully over the bedside, the small lamps casting shadows across his mother's stiff form, when suddenly he wasn't standing in front of his mother at all, but was in a pink room with wooden floors, and a pair of familiar blue pigtails poked out from above a rich pink blanket that only highlighted the paleness of her cheeks. A cruel laugh echoed from behind, and Adrien spun around to see Hawkmoth looming over him. "She's gone, Adrien. There's nothing you can do." Adrien tried to speak, tried to shout, to disagree, to summon plague, anything. But he couldn't. He could only stand there motionless as Hawkmoth continued to laugh. "Where are you, Ladybug? Please, please, you have to do something. You have to fix this." Tears ran down his face as he pleaded silently, eyes darting around in desperation, but that just made the villain's wicked smile grow wider. "Ah, looking for your partner, I see. But that doesn't matter because she doesn't remember you. She works for me now." Adrien's heart pounded wildly as an akumatized ladybug appeared from the shadows and started moving closer to him. He watched helplessly as she reached for his ring, but at the last second she made a grab for the strand of beads he still carried in his hand and wrenched it from his grasp. The string snapped and beads flew in all directions, the sound of their clatter drowned out by a loud shout as his stupor was finally broken. "No! Adrien Agreste, control yourself at once!" A harsh voice split through his thoughts, and Adrien snapped to attention as he glanced about in bewilderment and found himself back in his classroom, half stretched out across his desk with a hand reaching in thin air. He quickly fumbled to a sitting position and straightened his back as he stared up into the piercing gaze of Mrs. Mendelea. "I'll have you know that sleeping during instruction is not to be tolerated in this classroom, and neither is playing with frivolous trinkets." Adrien gasped as she held up the lucky charm Marinette had given him, and was relieved to see it all intact, then held back a growl as an overpowering anger flooded through him, and his eyes flashed dangerously as he leapt to his feet. "I need that back." He didn't raise his voice, but the class grew hushed as the intensity of his tone was undoubtedly clear. The teacher's eyes widened before settling into a hard scowl, and she raised it up tauntingly. "I will not have you speak to me in that tone of voice, Mr. Agreste. I happen to know your father expects you to pursue a high degree of academic excellence, which cannot be done when you waste your time fooling around with useless objects when you should be focusing on studying science. Now take a seat, young sir." Adrien's nails dug into his palm as he clenched his fist angrily, but did as he was told, his eyes never leaving the precious charm in her hands. The teacher glared at him from over her glasses and raised her head stiffly. "Good. Now that I have your full, awake attention, we may resume." She spun around, and Adrien felt his heart leap fearfully as she carried the charm away with her. "Wait!" His hand stretched out unbidden as he half rose to his feet, his voice pleading as he asked, "May I have it back, please?" Mrs. Mendelea's face darkened as she answered coolly, "Apparently you haven't learned your lesson, and disrespectful outbursts are to be met with swift and decisive punishment regardless of any social status. Something you would do well to remember, Mr. Agreste. In fact," she continued, "I believe now would be the perfect time to give you all a lesson in the combustibility of plastics versus wood." Her voice lingered maliciously on that last word, and Adrien's eyes widened in horror as he realized what she was about to do. The science instructor dangled the beads close to a flickering flame, and to Adrien it felt as if she held Marinette's very life on that string. Within seconds, Adrien had raced out of his seat and crossed the distance to the demonstration counter. Mrs. Mendelea stiffened in shock as Adrien cupped her hands away from the fire, clasping the beads in her bony gloved fingers between his. "What is that?" "Marinette gave this to me." The teacher's cold eyes softened almost imperceptibly as Adrien felt his own sting with tears. "Please, it's all I have left of her." Mrs. Mendelea clucked and muttered, then released the beads with a huff. "Oh, very well. I suppose it won't cause too much trouble if you keep it in your pocket for the remainder of class, and I can see why it's so important to you. We were all affected by Marinette's unexpected accident, and it's a shame she can't be with us today. Though really, Mr. Agrest," she added, the usual dryness returning to her voice, "you'd think she was dead with the way you've been acting. She's merely having trouble remembering things and needs some time to recover, but she'll be back before you know it." There was a hint of kindness in her eyes as she watched Adrien settle back into his seat, and he breathed a sigh of relief as he slid the charm back into his pocket and found comfort in her hopeful, albeit gruff, words. Mrs. Mendeley held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to the chalkboard with a harumph and muttered, "Who knows, perhaps she'll even be on time." Cat Noir swung his legs aimlessly as he shifted the strands of beads protectively through his hands and tried to shake the remnants of his former dream. Light footsteps sounded behind him, and Cat Noir quickly shoved the lucky charm into his pocket and out of sight as Ladybug drew near. "Hey, Cat Noir, are you ready for patrol?" He leapt to his feet and relaxed into a cheerful grin. "I'm always ready for you, m'lady." Ladybug rolled her eyes, though a light blush peeked out across her cheeks. "Always ready to fall behind, you mean. Race ya!" Cat Noir chuckled to himself as Ladybug took off running, and he swung out his stick as he began chasing after her. He smiled as the wind whipped past his face and the weight on his heart lightened. Spending time with Ladybug never failed to lift his spirits, and everything seemed easier when she was around. His eyes twinkled as he caught Ladybug glancing back at him before quickly looking away, her face flooding with an adorable pink. Ladybug, with her memories or without them, had always been pretty strict about following a schedule and wasn't one to be spontaneous, unless she was trying to avoid something. And given the telltale signs of flustered blushes and hasty allusion, he had a feeling it was him, something he was growingly pleased with. "So, Bugaboo," he began, keeping place beside her as he sent her a sly grin. "You seem in a clawful hurry. Are you going somewhere special tonight?" Ladybug's gaze remained steadily forward, though her tone was slightly higher than usual as she replied, "No, just happy to be out in the fresh air. Besides," she added, glancing sideways as she smiled shyly, "nothing is as special as the times I spend with you." Cat Noir nearly swooned, and as it was, he stumbled over his own feet and could barely contain the joyful amazement that flooded his soul. Not long ago, he had said nearly the same thing to her, and given her recent behavior, he couldn't help suspecting it was something deeper than friendship that prompted her to say it. His dreaming was cut short as Ladybug doubled over and clutched her head as if in pain. "Ladybug, are you all right?" She flinched with a grimace, then laughed it off with a smile, though there was still a trace of struggle in her eyes. Yes, I'm fine. I just need a break, that's all." She sat down heavily with a sigh, then seemed to relax as she gently slipped her legs over the edge of the roof and breathed in deeply. "Still, I think that's enough patrol for today. We've checked all the main areas, and if a villain shows up, we'll definitely know about it." Cat Noir nodded in agreement, though he felt his spirits deflate a little as that meant it was time to go home. "Want to join me?" Cat Noir glanced up in surprise as Ladybug patted the spot next to her, then smiled as he took a seat and stared out across the skyline. They sat in peaceful silence for a moment, and he felt his heart grow calm and steady as the worries from his morning faded away. Something bumped against his shoulder, and a light thrill ran through him as Ladybug leaned her head against his side and wove her fingers through his own. What if this was a new start? It would be so easy. He still loved her, and she clearly had feelings for him. So what's stopping him? A kind word here, a few compliments there, and he would surely sweep her off her feet with the help of her own heart and his irresistible cat-like charm. His free hand drifted up and lingered to the place where her lips had brushed his cheek merely hours before. That hadn't been an accident. Ladybug had given him a kiss of her own free will, and it was clear she cared deeply for him. Cat Noir shook his head, scolding himself for allowing such thoughts in his mind. Ladybug had always cared deeply for him, but that didn't mean they were in love. Without her memory, she only held half the pieces, relying on emotions and conclusions rather than truth and facts. She was vulnerable, and it was his duty to protect her, even from her feelings, and even from himself. This wasn't what she would want, and he loved her enough to respect that. He would be her partner, her friend, still giving encouragement and support where he could, but he would put a halt in his efforts to woo her and wait until she was capable of making the choice on her own. But what if her memory never comes back? The thought nagged through his mind like a nail caught on a string. She had to. He had to believe it was possible, for Marinette's sake as much as for Ladybug's. He straightened, gently removing his hand from hers as she glanced up in surprise. Not that I don't enjoy your company, milady, but this isn't really something you would normally do. He sent her an apologetic look and raised his eyebrows meaningfully. Ladybug's eyes widened in understanding, and she sent him a small smile as she ducked her head shyly, shoulders slightly slumped as she inched away from him. The space cut through him like a knife, and he wished he could take it back, but he knew he'd done the right thing, and she would thank him for it one day. The stars look really nice tonight. Yeah, they do, Ladybug exclaimed, a little too eagerly, but she seemed grateful for the change of subject. They sat in comfortable silence and stared up at the sky for a while. Then Cat Noir couldn't help stealing a glance at her as she gazed up at the stars in wonder, and their delicate light danced pleasantly across her face. Normally, he would say something like, "But you still shine brighter than all of them." Or, "They only shine so bright because they reflect your beauty." And it was true. She was far more beautiful than all of them, and his heart longed to tell her so. But for now he would just keep it to himself and treasure this moment, hoping for a day when he truly could speak his mind and capture his lady's heart. They lingered a while longer, neither wanting to leave, though Cat Noir could feel his eyelids growing heavy and noticed Ladybug seemed to be struggling to stay upright. "Well, milady, we should probably—" Cat Noir was interrupted as a burst of dark feathers filled the air, and he erupted into a series of uncontrollable sneezes. The heroes jumped to their feet, spinning their weapons protectively as a massive cloud of pigeons swarmed over them. "Ugh, not this again," Ladybug said irritably, glaring up at the birds as they swooped and dived in dizzying circles. "Well, at least it should be over quickly. The usual plan, milady?" Cat Noir asked, sending her a plucky wink that was quickly met with a smile. They both raced off in the same direction, the giant tower of pigeons being an obvious indicator of where the main culprit was, and aside from a few pecks and bruises, they discovered there was very little harm these birds could actually do, so the best choice of action was to simply plow through them. They rounded a corner when Ladybug suddenly stopped and gripped the wall as if to steady herself. Cat Noir stopped beside her, his face growing worried as he reached out to her in concern. "Ladybug, are you okay?" She flashed him a smile and straightened, though a hand still remained pressed against her head. "I'll be fine. I just rounded the corner a little too quickly. I think I'm still a little worn out from last night." Cat Noir wanted to slap himself in the forehead. Of course, what was he thinking? Ladybug had been going back in time for who knows how long, and she'd been using a unified Miraculous on top of a head injury. He should never have allowed her to even go on patrol, let alone tear through the streets with a flock of angry pigeons after them. They ducked as the birds caught up with them, and the air was soon filled with screeching hoots and bristling coos. A call from their master caused the pigeons to change direction and form into a ridiculously oversized throne, giving Cat Noir the chance he needed to slip away and lead Ladybug into the subway station undetected. "What are we doing here? This isn't the plan. We were so close to catching up with him," Ladybug said, tilting her head in confusion. Cat Noir held his hand out. "Give me your Miraculous." Ladybug raised her eyebrow in disbelief, then crossed her arms with a smile. "What, are you akumatized too or something?" Cat Noir couldn't help his face twisting into a small smirk before quickly growing serious again, staring at her earnestly. "You're not ready to go back to fighting. You've been through a lot, not to mention have a head injury to begin with. I've used the Ladybug Miraculous before, and this cat won't have a problem taking Mr. Feathers down." "You used the Ladybug Miraculous too? Wow, is there nothing you haven't done?" Ladybug asked, her voice teasing though her eyes sparkled in awe, and Cat Noir stood a little taller as he let her words strengthen his confidence. "What can I say? This cat's got it all in the bag, so there's no need to worry." He reached for her earrings, but she pulled back and drew her hand self-consciously to her ears. "I told you, I'm fine. I can totally do this, and I'm not just going to sit here and let you fight him alone. Besides, if you left me here without my powers, I'd be in even worse shape than I am right now." Cat Noir gritted his teeth uneasily. She had a point, and it was probably what he would have done if he was in her place. "All right, just please be careful, and we can slow down as much as you need." Ladybug rolled her eyes with a smirk, but nodded in agreement, and within minutes they had de-evilized the villain and sent Mr. Ramier on his way home. Found it, Ladybug said cheerily, tapping her partner's fist with hers as she and Cat Noir prepared to part ways. His eyes still looked a trifle worried for her, but he smiled warmly and seemed about to bow when he straightened and gave her a stiff nod instead. Ladybug watched him go, then was about to throw a yo-yo in the direction of home when the final dot on her earrings disappeared and her transformation was suddenly torn away into thin air. Marinette gasped as pounds of weight and dizziness pressed down on her all at once, her knees giving way as the force crushed her to the ground, and a tiny blur of red flashed across her eyes before her vision faded into darkness. Cat Noir! Cat Noir! A small voice cried desperately. Cat Noir glanced over his shoulder as a little red form came into view. He stopped short, the breath catching in his chest. Tikki? What happened? Where's Ladybug? The Kwame flew up to him, her face filled with worry. I wasn't able to recharge after Ladybug's lucky charms, so her transformation wore off, and now she's passed out in an alleyway. What? Cat Noir bolted back to the place they had been, coming to a halt just as he neared the building where he had last seen her. He turned anxiously to Tikki. Wait, if you're here, that means... Ladybug isn't transformed, Tikki replied solemnly, though her usual cheerfulness was starting to return now that she knew her holder would be in good hands. You'll have to keep your eyes closed, but I can lead you back to the place she lives, or close enough at least. And if you move now, it should be dark enough that no one will notice Cat Noir helping a random civilian get home. Okay, Cat Noir said hesitantly, feeling slightly nervous but determinedly putting it behind him as he shut his eyes and offered his hand to Tikki. Ready when you are. He took a few cautious steps forward as Tikki took a hold of his finger and led him deeper into the alley. His cat ears flickered as he became aware of a familiar yet jagged form of breathing, and he knelt down as Tikki directed his hands and he tenderly lifted the small figure up into his arms. The tips of her hair brushed against his chin, and he could feel small bits of dirt and rubble that must have gotten into it from falling onto the dirty ground. She whimpered slightly, but remained limp as he tried to gently adjust his hold on her and cautiously carried her as Tikki guided him through the street. He knew something like this would happen. Why hadn't he done more to prevent it? Tikki must have read the expression on his face as she said, She'll be okay, Cat Noir. She's been able to deal with the effects of multiple Miraculouses before, and once the pain from her head injury fades, she'll be back to normal in no time. Cat Noir tightened his grip protectively as he shook his head with remorse. But I should have done more to help her, to stop her. This is all my fault. I was the one who asked her to patrol with me today. I should have known she needed to rest. But I was too blinded by my own problems and forgot there's a person underneath the invincible mask she wears. Ladybug knew the risks, and I know she cares very much about helping you with your problems, even if it's just by being there. Everyone has those, and I'm sure you made Ladybug's day better just by spending time with her. Time at the risk of her own safety, Cat Noir muttered miserably. Something poked him in the nose, causing him to stop short, and he could almost hear the teasing smile in her voice as Tikki asked, Do you really think you could have stopped her if this was something she wanted to do? Cat Noir grinned and felt himself relax as he chuckled softly. Probably not. Exactly, Tikki replied with satisfaction. She would never want you to face a villain on your own, just like you wouldn't want that for her. You can't blame yourself for something she did, and you're already helping her in every way you can. Ladybug made this decision on her own, and while it definitely has its consequences, I don't think she would have wanted it any other way. Cat Noir sighed resignedly, though a small smile played ruefully about his lips. You're right, Tikki. I just hope she doesn't suffer too much for it. Small hands pressed against his face as the Kwame gave him a quick hug. She'll be okay, Cat Noir. You'll see. Besides, I'll be keeping a very close eye on her, she added, and Cat Noir laughed as the adorable creature playfully tried to make her voice sound threatening. He almost moved his head to glance fondly down at the girl he was holding, but checked himself just in time and remembered to keep his eyes closed, smiling softly as he relaxed to the gentle sound of her breathing and treasured the small bundle of warmth and preciousness in his arms. Marinette shivered slightly as a cold burst of wind swished past her face, and she struggled to nestle deeper into her covers, only to find there was none, and she was baffled by the strange bouncy motion that made her feel as if she were sitting in a moving tree or tucked into a boat on some lake. She opened her eyes bewilderedly and glanced around, confused by the blurry bits of buildings and street lamps that peeked out from a large field of black that glinted with a muted shine in the dim starlight. Her eyes wandered up to something golden and round, and above it was a charmingly defined jaw and familiar tousled strands of blonde hair. Her eyes widened in alarm. "Cat Noir?" His expression brightened. "Milady, you're awake." Marinette glanced down at her ungloved fingers and frantically felt her face for a mask, but was met with nothing. "Don't worry, milady, I haven't seen anything. Tikki's just helping me to get you back home after you fainted." Marinette glanced up to see Tikki sitting atop Cat Noir's head and gently tugging 2 strands of his hair as if she were directing a sleigh of reindeer, and she seemed quite pleased with herself for it. "I fainted?" she repeated, touching her head absently as she struggled to piece together the details, then winced as a flash of pain cut through her skull. "Yeah, I think you might have hit your head again, too. You must have fallen pretty hard, though from what I can tell there isn't any bleeding." "Oh." Marinette glanced back toward the ground, though the distance started to make her feel sick. She leaned her head back to where it was, and it was then she became acutely aware of Cat Noir's arms wrapped closely yet respectfully around her, and her cheeks burned as she realized she had snuggled up into the crook between his shoulder and neck and was all but cuddled against his chest. "Tikki, spots! No, Ladybug, don't do that!" Tikki exclaimed, and Marinette quickly gulped back the last part of her words as she stared up at her Kwame in confusion. "Your body needs time to recover. You've already been stretching yourself to the limit, and with your energy so low, another transformation so soon would do you more harm than good." "But," Marinette began, glancing helplessly between her Kwame and her current predicament, and shifted nervously. "Don't worry, milady, I'll get you home safe. Everything will be okay," Cat Noir said confidently, though his voice softened as he added, "You can hold on if that makes you more comfortable." She hesitated, then rested her head back as she slipped her arms around his neck and smiled trustingly, her worries lightening as she took in the soft rhythm of his heartbeat that mixed soothingly with the steady strides of his footsteps. Marinette furrowed her brow thoughtfully as a new sound mixed with the other ones, a cheerful thrum that started small but grew as she leaned her head closer to its source, mingling pleasantly with the previous sounds, though her brain fought curiously to place it as it pulsed faintly against her ear. She smiled as a thought suddenly came to her, and she glanced up at her partner teasingly. "Are you purring? I didn't know you could do that." The sound stopped abruptly, and Cat Noir stiffened, turning his head as if to glance away from her, even though his eyes were already closed. "Oh, yeah, sorry. I can't really control it. It just kind of happens sometimes." He chuckled awkwardly, his cheeks still slightly flushed with embarrassment as he sent her an apologetic smile. Marinette giggled slightly, then settled back against him. "I don't mind. I love cats. But hamsters are better," she added sleepily, suppressing a yawn as she let her eyes fall shut. "Really?" Cat Noir asked, a slight tinge of excitement in his voice. "Yeah, with their little puffy cheeks and tiny paws. No offense to you, of course." "None taken," Cat Noir laughed, then added softly, "I like hamsters too." They fell silent for a bit, and Cat Noir sensed Ladybug was growing tired, so rather than starting conversation, he tried to tread even more carefully, and savored what might be the last few moments they had together for a while if Tikki managed to keep well on her word and make Ladybug take a break from doing hero work. The girl in his arms still asked him a question every now and then, or pointed out something she noticed on the street, and the more he listened to her occasional comments and adorable sighs, the more he realized there was something sweetly familiar about her voice. He always noticed it whenever they spoke to each other untransformed, and would dutifully resolve not to pursue answers and merely focus on their present circumstance instead. But there was a part of him that tucked that piece of information safely into the furthest corner of his mind and carried it to be treasured in a secret place deep within his heart. He loved this girl, behind a mask or not, and it would only be a matter of time, along with a certain villain's defeat, before they could finally stop having secrets from each other. "Cat Noir, were you listening?" He turned his head quickly as his thoughts were brought back to the present. "What?" "Well, that's a no," his lady said dryly, though he could almost see her eyes twinkling as he picked out the teasing tone in her voice. "I said, you should probably put me down now. I can walk to my house from here." Cat Noir came to a reluctant stop, but frowned worriedly. "Are you sure you feel up to it?" "I'm feeling a lot better than I was, and trust me, if we go any further, you're going to know who I am, because as soon as he sees us, my dad is going to come charging out the door calling my name." Cat Noir couldn't help smiling as he tried to imagine what Ladybug's father might be like, and he was pleased to hear it sounded like he was very fond of his daughter. Well, in that case, I suppose you're in good hands, and if you need any more help, Tikki can always come get me. Thanks, kitty, Ladybug whispered, giving him a tight squeeze before letting go as he carefully set her down and helped her steady herself against a nearby building. They stood awkwardly for a moment, Ladybug leaning against the wall and Cat Noir standing next to her with his eyes determinedly shut, and it occurred to him that she must be waiting for him to leave. Oh, guess I should get going. I'll de-transform and have Plag lead me till I get farther away. That way I won't accidentally overhear anything with my impossibly good hearing. He smiled and gave a small wave in what he hoped was her direction. Be well, milady. Take care of yourself. He slipped around the corner and cautiously opened his eyes to make sure he was alone, then whispered, Claws in. Adrien closed his eyes again, and Plag willingly took a hold of his shirt as he steered him in the direction of home. Though Adrien felt a great deal less confident with his new guide, given Plag's overly mischievous snickers and pointed remarks about their recent predicament, and the Kwami seemed to take gleeful delight in leading him in what Adrien was certain were deliberate circles, before finally saying they were far enough away for Adrien to open his eyes. He surprisingly found himself right at the steps of his school, within sight of the Dupen Chang bakery, and he smiled as he noticed a warm light coming from Marinette's bedroom window. He tossed Plag a piece of cheese, as it appeared the Kwami had led him better than he thought. Thanks, buddy. Let's go home. He strode longingly past the bakery, taking in a deep breath of warm aromas and the scrumptious scent of fresh croissants, then quickly ducked behind a car to transform and leapt off into the night. The smells lingered in his mind as he readied himself for bed, and filled him with a reassuring comfort and hominess that always came when he thought of Marinette. He was sure now that despite the scare, both Ladybug and Marinette would recover soon, just as his teacher and Tikki had said, and just seeing that little light at the bakery after spending the night in darkness for so long had brightened his spirits and helped him believe things could be made right again. He closed his eyes dreamily, reliving the past few hours and feeling himself start falling into a deep sleep, when a distant, almost half-hidden thought teased about the back of his mind and danced into the memories, filling his nose as his brain drifted into unconsciousness. The road near Ladybug's house had smelled like pastries, too. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.